Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time to listen. My name is Annie, and I am the one who initiated this specific petition. So, this presentation is part of the Housing is Human Affordability Initiative, which was created to examine the growing disconnect between wages, housing costs, and long-term economic sustainability across the United States. The purpose of this project is not political division. It is to start informed conversations backed by publicly available data regarding what working Americans can realistically afford in today's economy. Throughout this presentation, I will walk through housing qualification realities, wage to rent gaps, regional affordability comparisons, and the data models used to analyze housing sustainability. This issue impacts millions of working individuals and families. And the goal here is to better understand the scope of the problem and begin discussing realistic solutions. So one of the biggest barriers many working Americans face today is the 3 times the rent rule. Many landlords and property management companies require tenants to earn 3 times the monthly rent in gross income just to qualify for housing. At the first glance, this may sound reasonable, and perhaps decades or so ago it was. However, when housing prices continue rising faster than wages, this requirement begins excluding large portions of working people from even basing housing opportunities. For example, if rent is $1,500 a month, a household may need to show $4,500 per month in income just to qualify. That equals $54,000 per year before taxes, not including childcare, transportation, healthcare, utilities, or food. The question this project asks is, are current wages actually keeping pace with what housing markets now require from working Americans? This slide compares the HUD fair market rent data against the income households would need in order to qualify under the standard 3 times the rent rule. I just wanted to insert this here to show you that I did aggregate the raw data in comparison and even included state minimum wages to come up with these calculations. So HUD fair market rent, or FMR, is commonly used as a benchmark for modest non-luxury housing costs across the country. The important thing to understand is these are not luxury housing prices. These are often considered baseline market rents for ordinary working households. When we compare these housing costs against actual wage realities, many states show significant affordability gaps. This helps demonstrate while so many people working full-time still struggle to qualify for housing even while technically employed. And if you do want the raw data on this, I will also make that available to anybody who asks. But I don't want to bombard anybody with raw data sets. They can lose their integrity over time. However, I will have this backed up if anybody needs. So right here, this slide highlights HUD fair market rent estimates for 2026. So the data includes 2-bedroom housing averages and 3-bedroom housing averages. And for visibility, I did break these down into regions. That's because it is hard to give you an overall view of all 50 states at once, and this would be much more easier to digest, but these are still averaged amounts. And I do also have the extended data available by state as well. But even as averages, the reason both are important is because household size dramatically impacts affordability. Families with children often require larger housing units, yet wages do not necessarily scale proportionally with those housing increased costs. This becomes especially important when discussing working families, single parents, and multi-generational households. The purpose of using HUD data is to establish a standardized national benchmark using publicly available federal data rather than personal opinion or isolated examples. This slide begins examining affordability gaps by region based on hourly income. And again, I do have the breakdown of income by state. It's just easily more to convey the overall message, which is really what this is intended to do. And the focus here is how much income per hour is actually needed to sustainably afford housing compared to what many workers are currently earning. This gap helps visualize the disconnect between minimum wages, whether there is a state applied minimum wage or if states are still honoring the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, housing costs, and qualification standards. For many working Americans, the issue is not necessarily unemployment alone. The issue is that even employment itself often no longer guarantees sustainable housing access. So, and what this means is that based on current data, and again, these are just national averages, broken out by region. So based on the fair market value of rent, based on what minimum wage is honored either at the federal or state level in each state, there's the gap. So somebody needing 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom, that can be anywhere between an $8.02 an hour gap or a $13.54 an hour gap. Northeast region, $15.39 for a 2-bedroom that is needed to increase, or the $23.75 an hour. So this gap means that this is in addition to what the state is honoring as the minimum wage. That is not the total, that is the gap needed. So if we're already getting $7.25 in the Midwest region, for example, we need to add $8.02. So essentially, to qualify for even the 2-bedroom, you would need $15 and 27 cents. So that is an example of what this actual gap means. And these aren't based off averages. So now this slide focuses specifically on two-bedroom housing affordability gaps to give a clearer view. A two-bedroom unit is often considered modest family housing or shared housing for working adults. And what this slide demonstrates is how much hourly income would realistically be required to meet housing qualification standards across different regions. In many areas, the income required exceeds minimum wage, entry-level wages, and in some cases, even median local wages. This creates a situation where people may technically work full-time and still remain financially blocked, struggling to pay bills, locked out of stable housing opportunities. And this expands the analysis to the three-bedroom housing. This is especially important for larger families, households with children, and single-parent households. As housing sizes increases, affordability gaps widen significantly in many states. This creates difficult choices for families: overcrowding, unstable housing, unsafe living conditions, excessive commuting, or financial overextension. And this slide helps demonstrate how quickly affordability breaks down for larger households, even under standard housing conditions. Everything included within this project was built using publicly available federal data sources, and the primary sources include the United States Department of Labor and Wage, HUD fair market rent data, and U.S. Census household income distribution data. The purpose of using federal data sources is transparency and consistency. So while you may be experiencing different types of gaps in your local community, when you support the petition, you could comment, just simply state in what you feel the wages needs based off your household or your state and what you see the rent would, what type of rent you have to pay for your household. Because again, this is aggregated data and it is from the, federal publicly available sources, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's realistic in what we're experiencing either. And I think that is extremely important too. So these information, this data that I'm compiling in this analysis is greatly subjective to, how current is that data actually? How realistic is it? And it is really conservative, and I built it out really conservatively to ensure it sustained credibility. We want to move something forward. We need to show that we're using credible information. This information is what they rely on, what different people rely on to make different decisions. And this project is not based on assumptions or isolated personal experiences alone. It is grounded in publicly available economic and housing information. The affordability models developed throughout the initiative were designed to better reflect working class earning realities rather than relying solely on broad statewide median income averages that can sometimes be distorted by higher earners. And before closing, I first want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen, engage in conversation, share personal experiences, review the data, and support this initiative.